across multiple media platforms, and the ever important, how on earth to manage content across multiple media platforms. So our answers to these questions are formed by our experience in developing IdeaStream and also with consulting with public media organizations across the years. This is our experience. So we hope it's informative as you find your own way, meeting the unique needs of your own situation. What we offer is not a recommendation to adopt so much as it is a model for you to consider and adapt to your own needs.
So the first question is, why manage content across multiple media platforms? And there could be many reasons why stations choose to do so. What's most important is to be absolutely clear about the why. It must be clear to everyone, from the licensee to the staff to the community. In the formation of IdeaStream, we were very, very clear. We wanted to better serve our communities. We saw multiple media as a way to do it. While we did believe we could achieve some operating efficiencies, we were not trying to reduce costs. Our goal was to have greater community impact. The important thing is for you to clearly define your goal for your station and your situation.
We were very fortunate to be involved in the creation of a new multiple media public service organization. We call it public service rather than broadcasting, In the beginning, IdeaStream was the consolidation of public radio and public television, both in Cleveland. Both were separately incorporated and both were community licensees. So there were similarities there. Over time, IdeaStream aggregated more stations and services to the mix to get to the 8 that Regina mentioned. No, so what was the motivation? Jerry has said it wasn't to save money. The motivation was to better serve our communities. The stations had pursued a multiple media project focused on a community issue, urban sprawl, which is important to metropolitan areas. Now, the project was very challenging, but also very successful. And the success supported what is, I think, a common understanding that multiple exposure to content across multiple media can be impactful. And the boards started talking and determined the best way to work together was to consolidate into a new multiple media organization, focused more on content and community service over multiple platforms rather than just on broadcasting. The initial mission statement for the organization was crafted by the new board leadership. It spoke and speaks directly to why IdeaStream chose to manage content across multiple media platforms. You'll notice there's no mention of any specific platform or technology. The mission? To strengthen our communities, that's the elevator speech, by providing distinctive, thought-provoking programs and services that enlighten, inspire, educate, and entertain. I'm sure those words are familiar to you. So perhaps for you, a good place to begin is to answer why. What is the why question, and how do you answer it relative to your own organizations? And maybe start with your own mission statement.
The next question is, what content to manage across multiple media platforms? And for IdeaStream, the answer was what we learned by listening to our community. In the case of IdeaStream, the announcement of our new organization was very well received, but the big question that people asked is, what content are you going to manage across multiple media? What are you going to do? And since our goal was to community impact, we turned to our communities for the answer. We listened through what we called our listening project.
So importantly, the listening project was not about radio or television or the programs or the scheduling, or really about any other media services. It was about our communities and what people in our communities value, identifying for themselves the most important assets and the challenges. In addition, it also gave IdeaStream a good list of potential partner organizations that also work to strengthen the assets and address the challenges. We also asked what could a multiple media organization do to help? This whole process, the listening project, is really more about community engagement than it is formal research. It provides a shower of information and data that can inform editorial priorities. The information gathered helped define areas of focus for idea stream content, but it was the act of listening that had probably more impact than anything else. Participants were grateful, and boy, did ideastream enjoy enormous goodwill for conducting the listening project, not just from ordinary people, but from civic leaders as well. Ideastream was noticed. So the experience was transformative. It was reinforcing. It was our first step in our commitment to community engagement, community partnership, and community impact. So such a commitment is not required to manage content across multiple media platforms, but for us, it became the primary motivation that helped sustain efforts and overcome all the many challenges that were involved.
So what did we hear from the community? Well, while the responses varied by form of survey and by group to group over the many years, in the aggregate, the themes were remarkably consistent across the community. The themes also mirrored similar studies of community issues that had been independently conducted by other organizations. The responses informed ideastream resource development, programming, the organization of multiple media production teams. While not an exclusive list, these 6 focused and funded areas of content were defined as a result of listening to our community. Arts and culture, community, by which we meant people, issues, assets, and challenges, education, health and science, and issues relating to the state of Ohio.
So let's turn to the next question: how to manage content across multiple media platforms. It is our privilege as public media professionals to translate community needs into content. The key in multiple media is to have everyone working together. For ideastream, that meant integrated teams, a lot of communication, very strong leadership, shared goals, and accountability.
So continuing with how to manage across multiple media platforms, at ideastream, we went through a number of structures, adapting the organization as it grew from the consolidation of the initial 2 to the consolidation of 8 different educational and public service media efforts. The chart on this slide is a mix of positions and functions. It's not a chart for an actual organization. It is rather an example of a potential organization. In this example, there is a single leader for all distribution and production, the content director, the director of content, and it's across all platforms. The role is truly team leadership, coordinating the work of all those involved in the content area. It requires a great deal of focused and attentive and ongoing management. This example includes individual leaders reporting to the director of content for each primary platform. The platforms, of course, will vary by licensee. Those platforms are also likely to change over time. This example includes a radio platform, a TV platform, a unit with responsibility for web, mobile, and social media platforms. This structure reflects a respect for the integrity of each platform that has specific requirements for programming, traffic, operations, promotion, and more. But finally and importantly, this example includes an integrated content development and production unit. That unit has a leader and a staff of multiple media producers and news reporters organized around those identified, focused, and funded areas of content. Again, the list will vary from organization to organization based on identified community needs and interests. This structure encourages ongoing management of content across media platforms.
A way to think about multiple media projects is through something that's called a big footprint. So that's a major content initiative across multiple media over a very specific focus period of time. And so some of the elements of success for such an effort include a lead project manager with ultimate responsibility for successful execution. Ideally, that person reports to a member of the executive team. The project manager leads and has authority to convene a team from throughout the organization, no matter the department, and ensures ongoing follow-up. A team on assignment from across the organization might include news, production, technology, all people capable of in-depth content for distribution across media platforms. Community engagement and partnership are part of the mix, along with impact tracking, marketing, and development, which is so important to ensure sustainability through fundraising. Advanced planning is just critical, and it's as is coordination with other staff. Those are 2 points I just have to underscore. Choreographed scheduling across platforms can also make all the difference. And to ensure that impact across platforms, you have to promote, and promote again.
Continuing on about how to manage content across multiple media platforms, there are some things that are required to make such an organizational structure effective. There are just some basics that need to be firmly established. Again, it requires a great deal of focused, attentive, ongoing management. Included in those basics are clear, detailed job descriptions with articulated roles and relationships, departmental and cross-departmental and individual and shared measurable goals. That was a complex project for us. Clear measurement of goal attainment with open reporting of progress, and departmental, cross-departmental meetings with regular agendas focused on meeting community needs and established goals. It takes a lot of time and a lot of communication.
So what did we learn? Well, in summary, for IdeaStream, the why was to better serve our communities. The what was what we learned by listening, and the how was integrated teams, communication, leadership, shared goals, and accountability. Along the way, we learned a great deal.
First and foremost, this is very hard. It can be extraordinarily frustrating because it is breaking long-established assumptions and patterns of work.
And of course, there will be resistance from very dedicated professionals who have focused very long and successfully on any specific individual platform. That should be no surprise, and it requires a great deal of patience.
There's concern often about who has the authority to decide. Many involved are used to having complete discretion over what they do. They may feel constrained by working within a framework of focused and funded content areas, no matter how well documented or intended.
It can be very messy. If you invite in community involvement, it often involves partnerships with other organizations, and guess what? They may have their own agendas.
It can also be confusing for the staff and sometimes the community. It requires very clear branding, promotion, internal and external communications. Do all you can in these areas and then do more. Be relentless and persistent over time, always checking to be sure the message is received.
You know, in the end, it is absolutely worth it. When it works, it's a beautiful thing, and it inures to the benefit of the community and to your organization.
So that's our little presentation for today. We leave you with a reference to a couple of things that we've provided to Virginia to make available to you on a website. This presentation will be available with the script, and also there will be a PowerPoint presentation on the community impact model for public media, which was developed by a group of public media organizations with the consulting group FSG, Foundation Services Group. That's the group that created the concept of collective impact about 10 years ago. The second is the Big Footprint Playbook, which was developed by a group of public media organizations involved in this type of work. Those will be available to you. And finally, we are providing, as the last slide in this presentation, our contact information should you wish to follow up. Thanks very much for listening to our little presentation. Now let's talk.
Please, let's talk. We don't have any messages in chat, so unmute yourselves and ask your questions, please.
Kit and Jerry, thank you so much. So if you're doing this all over again, what would you do different?
Go ahead, Kit.
Oh, so many things. I think more dedicated communication with the staff. We were so busy, we didn't intend to become an organization with 8 different arms. It just happened to us. And it happened in such a way that there was really, it was to the benefit of everybody to do it. So we felt we really had to do it. But along the way, the staff kind of got lost and they forgot why we were doing any of this. And so then that allowed pockets of resistance to build up, and probably still some today. So I would spend a lot more time earlier, spending a lot of time on different communication processes. I think probably bringing in some outside help would have helped on that. We thought we spent enough time on getting to know you and getting to know your mission and getting to know what we're trying to do. We didn't. It's that old thing is by the time you're completely bored with a subject, somebody might be just getting to that point. And that's really, it's the basis of communication, isn't it? So I think we didn't do enough.
I would agree. Yeah, that we didn't have the time and energy and resources to spend enough time with the staff to bring everybody along. Now, some of them, decided to leave because they just didn't like the new program. They wanted to do what they did. They didn't want to produce for the web, or radio people didn't want to produce for TV, or the other way around. And there was nothing we could do to stop that. But for those who were willing, I think we could have spent more time. I also think we probably could have invested more earlier in the broader branding issue, trying to better define for the community what ideastream was. We just kind of laid it out there and let them figure it out.
And how did you approach training? That's from Bruce.
Well, part of it was to make sure that everybody was equipped and had the resources they needed in order to be able to try new things. And that meant, as you know, technology constantly evolves. So it means investing in technology for everyone and deploying it universally. And that's really important because technology shouldn't be a mystery, not today. When everybody can edit anything on their laptop and expect to do so, it isn't a mystery anymore. While you can go into the editing booth and create the most marvelous documentary with the highest standards, everybody expects to be able to do things. So equipping people was one, training people was another. And then I think one of the things that we did very well was to set up teams that experimented and applaud them and show their work to everybody and applaud them. And it helped that they started to win awards too. So that was a nice incentive, I think.
Yeah, if we were to respond to a question of what did you do right, I wish we could claim that we were brilliant and it was intended, but I'm not so sure that's the case. We sort of threw people into the pool because we didn't have any choice. So an example, our canaries in the coal mine were people who were involved in arts and culture. When we started, the radio station had been doing a daily 1-hour arts and culture magazine type program. And the TV station was doing a weekly half-hour arts and culture program. And so we just put those people together into one unit and said, go to work. You've got to produce a daily radio show and a weekly television show. And oh, by the way, now things are evolving. You have to remember, we did this 20 years ago, so it wasn't as easy back then. But as things evolved, chunk it and add it to the web and make it searchable, etc. And it was amazing how they left alone, they came together and just started. Pretty soon the radio guy was producing for TV and the TV people were producing for radio, and they were both, they got into it. And then we just stood them up at every staff meeting and applauded them.
Yeah, it was so interesting too, because they would discover for themselves what worked and what didn't work. And they would start with an idea and then keep adding components to it. And one of the very best was the conductor of the Cleveland Orchestra, who rarely at that point gave any interviews, loved the radio host. So consented to do a radio interview, and she talked him into doing call-in, unheard of, right? And so then, they thought, well, let's put it in a studio, and because it'll be fine for the radio audience, and we'll just capture it. And then the orchestra said, well, that sounds like a fascinating event. Could we invite some donors? And then our development department said, well, if they're doing donors, we're doing donors. So suddenly we had an audience in a TV studio, and we were doing a live call-in radio program. And then the education folks got hold of it and said, oh no, this is a statewide event. And that's why a child in one of the very poorest of counties in Ohio, in his library, brought his instrument in to be able to ask a question of the conductor, and the conductor took the question, and we could see and hear the student, and it turned into a marvelous event. And this was before we had the idea of choreographing these things. This just happened.
So it was an interactive video lesson for the kids across the state. Very interesting. And that happened because of the good people who were involved, who, in a sense, just didn't know any better, didn't know what they couldn't do.
Esperanza has a question. You need to unmute, Esperanza.
My question is around the management of the content. And, right now we have Facebook, Instagram, we have the website, we have on air, we have all these different things, right? And when I joined the group, we were talking about what I wanted to get out of this conversation. And one of the things, because I'm pushing to hire a content management, the challenge for me in this proposition that I'm making is I don't want to make it in a way that is threatening to people, a threat to people, to their positions and how much autonomy they have in their own things. So I know this is a little bit of politics and everything, but do you have any idea of a workflow kind of thing for the person that will?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because, and it's not limited to public media, just in our culture. We're so used to hierarchical organizations. So even in the slide I showed, where we had the example, it was director of content. That's probably not what it is. It's probably more of a convener, a coordinator, a coach. First of all, you're not going to find anybody who has expertise in all of those areas. I mean, they may be deep in one of them, but they're not going to be fully fluent, and no one could be across all the different platforms that we have available today. I think one thing that we tried to do was we tried to write, beyond job descriptions, we had a separate document that were called role statements. And in a role statement, we didn't talk so much about their authority. We talked about their relationships and how they were expected to spend their time. And in there was much more language about team building and communication and coaching and exchange and process that sort of set the tone. And of course, you got to get the right person too. That's the other thing. I mean, they have to have sufficient gravitas to project authority and get stuff done, but they don't want to be sort of a top-down they may have to at certain points of time
Mhm.
when timelines get pressed and urgent things occur. But as a general rule, they've got to be much more of a team leader than a director, you know? I don't, those were a couple of things. We didn't have universal success with that because we had different experiences with different people over time.
Yeah.
We were fortunate to have journeyman folks on the staff who had come up through radio and television and eventually through social media, who were intrigued by this whole idea of how do you do this across platforms. And they worked together pretty well. So I guess one solution would be not to have a person, but to have a kind of a team captain. On the other hand, you've got to have.
That's a good idea, though.
Well, if you can think of them that way, even though they really have to have authority, or else nothing will get done. Unless they can yank somebody's chain in a pressing situation.
It's more like a project manager. You know, if we can, I might start selling it that way.
Yeah, they also have to have accountability though, and some
yeah.
project managers are only process people, and this has to be both process and results.
Yeah.
And the combination is really important. And I think also the organization underscoring the importance of the role and the expectations for everyone to be responsive. And this is where shared goal setting really helps. Because then you can have clear, definable, accountable, measurable results that have to be publicly shared. And that kind of transparency, both in terms of dealing honestly with people in terms of expectations, and then dealing honestly with the organization and reflecting its successes and its problems back to itself so it can then fix them again, is really important to creating a learning organization.
Yeah, this position might be seen as somebody who's here to help, you know, not to obstruct or order you around, but to help you achieve the objective that has been determined, which is spilling this content across the media platforms.
And they need really excellent people skills, almost intuitive.
Joanne Yerfurski has a question. Joanne?
Hi, Kit and Jerry. It's so nice.
Nice to see you.
You know, Kit, especially, you know that I have long been a fan of the Listening Project. And we did that here at WUSF in about 2009. And it's been on my mind that, and we were not able to continue. It was the financial crisis, right? So we didn't have the funds to keep spending on that. But if you were starting it today, how would you start today? What would be the steps you would go through to start doing the Listening Project?
Well, you know, this idea came to us because we needed to answer the question that the people were asking. Back when we were going out in the community and trying to tell people what we were doing 20 years ago, most people just eyes glazed over. They didn't know what we were talking about. I just want my radio station. I want my television station. Don't change it. But the people who got it asked the question, that's a great idea. What are you going to do? How are you going to identify issues in the community to address? And that's where the idea came from. And we didn't quite know how to do it. We got David and Judith Leroy to come in. They created the project. And the first one was very, very robust, but then we ran out of money too. We didn't have any money, but we kept listening. We just kept it going. Sometimes it was only a half a dozen panels a year where we would invite community people, or we'd go out into the community to various.
Yeah, and we also did on-air messaging about it. You know, go fill out the survey.
Yeah, and then we had them filling out the survey online and dialoguing, and so we just kept it going even at a reduced level, and and it just became, because what it's really about is ongoing listening. It's about connecting to the community. We would publish these reports and they look so much like research. People, would try to attack them on the basis of their validity, when that wasn't what it was about. It was about getting to know the community, and then being able to work within that community. And it wasn't about taking anybody's authority to make decisions about what programming would be done. It was to inform those decisions, so that we did a better job. So my advice would be just do it. Just keep doing it. Just put up a web page and start sending stuff out and say, we're listening, and have a couple of meetings. That doesn't take,
And a good
coffee
way
and
to,
donuts.
a good way to integrate the information is to connect it to other community surveys that are going on. There's usually a chamber or a development
Or a university.
organization or some sort of a nonprofit group that may be doing connecting to and doing very statistically valid research. And so comparing internally within your organization, comparing what you're hearing to what other people are finding helps create, I think, a focus and an understanding of what can be a very clear editorial mandate, an imperative, because as things change, you get to hear about it almost firsthand. And, there's nothing more powerful than the act of listening.
Yeah.
And to be able to listen as an organization and to be recognized as an organization that listens is raises everything in terms of the importance of what the work is of the hardworking people and doing the content.
So just keep listening.
Other questions? John Decker.
Yeah, if I could find the unmute button.
That's usually my problem. How are you?
On the screen. It's good to see you guys. Good to see everybody, actually. Could you, this great conversation, and thank you for sharing your experiences. Could you talk a little bit about the creative process? Could you pivot towards how the structure of the organization that you had in mind, that you put in place, how did that help or hinder the creative process? Because as we know, best laid plans don't always come to fruition. And it's been my experience, and I think a lot of us have experienced this, where it's those ideas that we don't plan, the ideas that come from an event or from a group of people that you've thrown together that are just doing something. Suddenly, boom, you've got a great idea. So could you talk a little bit about how what you set in place helped that creative process, and a little bit more about how content then was created and those ideas came to life?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I think we have to go back to what we talked about with the arts team, but broaden it. We had another meeting that would take place periodically that neither of us were ever involved in. Or Kip may have been involved in the first one, but that was it. And we didn't have a name for it. It was called the Stuff Meeting. And it was people from, it was people not just from the arts and culture team, they were in it, but so was news, and so were education, and even we cohabitated with a performing arts group, and we put them in the meeting too.
And it got to be interesting enough so that people would want to go. And they would come from departments like development will go, oh, I have to hear what's going on so I might be able to think about a grant or have a talking point or a case statement or whatever it is. So you find people, and everybody was, anybody who wanted to could walk in and be part of the meeting. But it had an agenda but it was also open-ended as well. So stuff happened.
Yeah, and it was nominally based on event calendar, right. Such and so is coming, former President Carter is coming, or whatever, to the Performing Arts Center, or to one thing or the other. And it would stimulate that. Oh, really? Gee, the education people might say, really? How could we get him in an interactive video interview situation? Or How could we get that? So that level of creativity in terms of cross-fertilization was stimulated by that kind of communication and sharing.
Mhm.
In terms of other things, there were so many creative moments that happened, often because we did not have the technology or the money to do it right. And somebody came up with a good idea. I could give you an example, but it would take too long to just, well, I'll try. There was one where the Cleveland Orchestra Chorus was performing at different venues in the community. And one of their tricks was that they would go into a grocery store and in twos and threes separate themselves into various aisles. And they would just start to sing. Two of them would start to sing, then two more, and they'd do some,
A mob performance.
yeah, some classical music piece in this grocery store. And suddenly the store was just filled with song. And we didn't have enough cameras or camera people to capture, all the different places, let alone all the reaction of all the different people in the store. And one of our producers asked if the store had security cameras. And they did. And they ended up taking the security camera footage and integrating it. Now, you wouldn't want to spend your whole half hour on a security camera, but for the little snippet to get that child's eyes, that lit up, or the mouth dropping, it was perfect. So a lot of it came from, in that sense, the lack of resources. So cross-fertilization, the necessity being the mother of invention. But it also had its challenges. You had people who, we are blessed in our business with people who are very dedicated to the craft. They're very dedicated. Kit used to call the radio guy golden ears. You had to have
the perfect audio engineer.
Yeah, and you couldn't measure it, but he could hear it. And you needed this kind of mic and that kind of mic, and that just that made it more difficult because it led to conflicts between how the production could be done. And sometimes those didn't end happily. But I would say that the creativity came from these people who really didn't know one another that well, had never thought that they had anything in common, but suddenly discovering, that they did. Is that helpful and responsive?
Oh yeah, no, it's very good. Thank you. What you're describing really is something that happens in spite of the organizational structure
Yes.
that you're trying to put together, right? I mean, you're trying to think of platforms, you're trying to think of content as separate delivery avenues. They are, and each one of them has their strengths and weaknesses and ways to utilize them that better off with the audience, etc. But the creativity happens when you get a bunch of people together with too much coffee and they're starting to talk about stuff, and then suddenly you've got a multi-platform idea for something, right?
Yeah.
And I think you need both, right? You need the structure in order to execute the idea and the plan so that we go here, here, and here. But you also need that space for the folks where they can just like spitball ideas and boom, and then have someone help, like you said, like your content director really help, like help make those things happen, or maybe even prioritize, because who knows, maybe you've got something in the pipeline already that suddenly isn't all that important because this other thing takes over. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts to it.
I have 2 points I would add to that. One is that there is also a role for structure. And I would say that the really biggest projects probably require that. I used to convene all the platform managers and executive editors and essentially pose something for them to think about, and then ask them to come back with coordinated ideas about what we might do. And sometimes they came back and said, "That's a really stupid idea. We can't think of any. It's done. It's done." And I'd have to go, "Okay." But here's the other thing: is part of my role statement is that I had spent a lot of time in the community, And as ideastream became an important civic institution, people in places with a lot of information would talk to me. And so I could, and often was, the the catbird in the community who I could say, this is not yet public and it is coming up. Let's think about it. And why don't you think about something you might want to do with it or not? And it's not a forced agenda, but I could bring new things to the table. And in that same way, a lot of community leaders might come to us and say, we really want, I remember one, we want to engage the community. You guys know how to do that. Would you help us as in have a very wide regional 3.5 million people conversation about some of the things that are going on? And so we had to put our thinking caps on, and one of our brilliant executive producers came up with a model designed so that commercial media could be part of it too. So created lots of holes and donuts around produced content so that they could also be part of it. Well, suddenly you've got, talk about multiple media, you've got a lot of media talking about it in a very orchestrated way. And so, if it fits the mission, if it fits, the values of the organization and its editorial focus, presumably you don't do something that's outside of that. Then you have to be permeable to those ideas. So sometimes it does take structure.
And Suzanne Ramallah has a question. Suzanne, you'll need to unmute.
No, I don't. Sorry, but
Oh.
Karen Swanson does.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Kit and Jerry, when as you developed this, how did it affect positively or negatively just your fundraising, either in membership or grants or community corporate support, that kinds of thing?
Yeah.
How did you attack that?
Yeah, well, in our case, that was a great anxiety because we were bringing together two organizations, and the fear was, would people write, one check rather than two? And so we had to go to work on that problem.
Almost immediately.
And the way we solved it in our particular case, it wouldn't necessarily be true if you've got an established structure, but we said we want you to be a member of WCPN, the radio station, and also we want you to be a member of WVIZ, the television station. And then we cross-sold one to the other, and it worked very, very well, and it boosted the radio membership dramatically. And then for the major funding clients, that just took conversation. We just had to say, look, here's what we're trying to do in the community. We're going to have some operating efficiencies, but we're going to redirect that into more community service. So we can't afford for you to just write one check. You can write one check, but it's got to equal the same amount of money or more. And those conversations worked well. In the longer term, the answer to your question is that the institution became far more important with its component parts together than they were individually. And so suddenly we were in a position where we were invited to meetings with people who we were never in the room with before. And fielding requests to do things, some of which we had to turn down because they were not appropriate from a journalistic standpoint. But that we were invited to the table because we made some noise. The gun sounded louder when it was all these things were shot off. The cannons were shot off at the same time. In fact, one community leader, in response to one of the projects that we did, described it that way. He said, ideastream is like calling the community to attention. So, and that wasn't because we had the biggest audience. It was because we were reaching people in multiple ways. and reaching into different pockets of the community through the work that we did. So in the end, we became a stronger, more important community institution, and suddenly found, and we're fortunate to be in Cleveland, which is a community of tremendous philanthropy and a real history and culture of support from foundations and individuals. And we got on the list because we started to make more noise. Huh?
To be really specific though about money, at 10 years, we thought we'd better look back and decide what had we accomplished anything, and we had doubled the assets. At 20 years, we'd done 2 major campaigns totaling about 65 million on top of annual income, which had risen from a combined start of 15 million to about 26 million. So the organization absolutely was impacted by recessions and financial situations, as it was everybody. But over time, everything grew. And it grew because the branding, because of the community positioning, because of the leadership, the people ascribed to it in the community. And it became, part of the vision statement was to be worthy of philanthropic support. And so it became evident that we were worthy, and the philanthropic support happened as a result of that. And that's the magic of it. I saw a note from John Decker there that said, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. It's absolutely true. Absolutely true. And it does ascribe financially, not to say that there won't be problems. But here's the other thing is that you have to really manage your channels, your traditional channels. And you cannot back off of that, because at the end of the day, while we were talking before everybody signed on about how many screens do you have? Well, we have learned to operate with split screens. Our attention is deflected more easily as a result of that. So you still have to super serve every single platform with all of the best practices. Never, never, never forget the best practices. And so there has to be a proven history of excellence in everything that you do. It's not just making stuff, but it's how you provide it and being smart and agile about it at the same time. So it stimulates a lot of creativity.
In the few minutes we have left, could you each share one of the projects that you think had the greatest impact, or that motivated the most people? What would those be?
Why don't you start with the quiet crisis?
Yeah, the first one, we hadn't even actuated the consolidation yet, and but we had gone down to the newspaper and met with the editorial board to give them a preview of what we were about to do. That we were going to combine radio and TV, keep operating excellent platforms, but try to cross-fertilize content. And we went down there and we told them what we're going to do as sort of a preview to the announcement. Then we made the announcement, and weeks later, the editor of the newspaper called, and he said, you were in here and you told us about what you're doing with this cross-media stuff. So yeah, he said, well, we've got a project here, and I don't know, I don't want to get too deep into it, but it had to do with economic decline, about major corporations moving their headquarters offices and moving their manufacturing out of Cleveland, which was always a point of pride for the community. He said, this is happening and nobody seems to want to talk about it. He said, and we want to talk about it, but we think we need to partner with you in order to do it for 2 reasons. He said, first of all, we don't think just writing about it is enough. We think people need to actually hear discussion about these issues. And this is before, the internet was, you were still struggling to get audio on the internet. at this point. He said, so we'd like to invite you into this picture, and we'd like to do these things together with a series of articles and programs and big footprint about these different topics relating to the economic development of the community. That's the first reason, because we think it will enhance. The second reason is we don't want to be the only ones they throw bricks at, because it's going to sound like real bad news. And so we said yes, and we started out of the box doing this series that we called The Quiet Crisis, which was radio, television, print, and community events. And they were just starting their cleveland.com, so right. We had internet stuff, and it just was an enormous impact. 3 weeks later, the governor of the state of Ohio, in Ohio, the governor's down in Columbus, but he's up in Cleveland giving a speech, and he refers to the quiet crisis and how important it is to have these discussions. We ended up doing, I don't know how many of them, but it lasted 4 or 5 years, and had enormous impact in the community, and gave us enormous credibility as an institution, and became sort of the defining project for us. You want to talk about one?
Just to monetize it just a little bit for the community. As a result of it, one of the things the community did was pull together 70 foundations, family, small ones, large ones, and they created a fund which was designed to invest in helping with this problem of the quiet crisis. And there was no question that ideastream was an important, as well as the Plain Dealer, was, it wouldn't have happened probably. It was called the Fund for Our Economic Future, and still exists today, by the way. And so, that's an important long-term impact beyond the 4+ years that we actually did the series. I think another one that I find fascinating is that, how when you go to Washington, D.C., you get in a cab and the cab drivers are listening to NPR, and the group of people that you're with. Well, one of the things that is iconic in Cleveland is the Cleveland Orchestra. Now, this is for people who have never been to the Cleveland Orchestra, may never have set a foot in Severance Hall. They may or may not ever listen to it, but all the cab drivers could talk about Cleveland Orchestra and drive you in front of Severance Hall if you're a visitor to town. And in the same way they do with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And so strategically, Cleveland Orchestra is an internationally renowned organization. So, local, yeah, it's important, but is it really important? At one point, we decided to invest in a lot of time getting to know the organization institutionally and putting people together from the top roles in each organization to say, what is it that we share? Do we share anything in common? What's your strategic plan? Here's our strategic plan. Do you see anything in there that's of interest to you? And it led to an agreement, and it was a very simple agreement, which is essentially to do some stuff together. So it was very benign, let's put it that way. And out of that has come a succession of content, which is still ongoing, and probably the penultimate was a major birthday celebration for the orchestra, which ideastream co-produced with WNET, that was on Great Performances. Now, that's a TV specific example, but it had tons of radio spinoff, internet spinoff, education, and digital spinoff, digital content spinoff. Yeah. And everybody paid attention in the community, and they all said, oh, well, that's because IdeaStream is a good partner. Everybody should partner with IdeaStream. And so, and it yielded not just cultural, but other forms of collaboration. But it takes time, and it takes a lot of talking together, and it takes not forcing the agenda, but making opportunities, kind of back to the stuff meeting. If you can get the right people in the room, good stuff can happen.
A couple of comments, just because I know we're going to wrap up here. One is that partnership was a critical piece of what we did. Really partnering on content with other organizations, which is difficult to do. But that was a very leveraging our assets with the orchestra assets, with the plain dealer assets, very important to us. And the second is that some of these initiatives were not sustainable. Some of them went away. The funding model just didn't work. And that was sad and not easy to give up, but it happened. So not everything worked, but the core activity, the 3 broadcast stations, the core educational service, the statewide coverage of the legislature, all those sustain. It's only on the margins that things might not have.
And of course, digital is hugely important today. And there was a great deal. One of the last campaign we did was to increase the investment in content, specifically in digital. And so and we raised 30 million, but 20 million for that. And so that was good.
So you guys have continued to consult a little bit around the country. Can you point to anybody, any station that's like, watch what they're doing? They're doing something well.
Well, you got KPBS on the line here.
Present company, included.
They're doing well. There are a lot of. I think if you really think about it, almost every station is a multiple media operation today. It's just that they may not be leveraging it to the maximum that they could because they're thinking about it. Often people think about it as platforms or as stations rather than thinking about the institution as a community resource. So in our more grandiose holding forths, we would say, look, the key is to surrender your assets to the community. And actually get wet in the community and start to do things that you have some indication are of critical importance to that community. And that's a very different mindset from the traditional broadcast mindset. We talk, you listen, we write, you read. Mm-hmm. That's not where to be.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. It's just been really enlightening and interesting. And thanks to the participants for joining us and for giving us some real meaty questions and discussion items.